Um, it is wonderful to be here. My goal is to synopsize what your options are in caring for someone with dementia and to give you some confidence that there are resources out there, Lisa's place being a great one, to help you along the way. Yes, I've been doing this for 18 years. And when I say I was number one in the country, that was 10 years ago when I worked for a big company. And I decided that the way they worked was not the way I wanted to work and went out on my own 7 years ago, close to 8 years ago. And I've placed well over 1,000 people doing this work. So I know the devil's in the details. And I have a bunch of topics to go over, so I'm going to do my best. The first one being understanding your options. Now, many of you, I imagine, are caregivers handling things at home, is my guess. Soshi, am I right? And my hat's off to you. That's what I want to say. It's very stressful. You need a lot of patience and training, frankly, on interacting with people with dementia. And usually what I do is work with people who are having difficulty coping with all that's involved in keeping their loved ones at home. And that may include the financial stress of it because caregiving has become more and more expensive. So getting a break from it is tougher. Also, depending upon where your loved one is in the dementia disease, giving them stimulation that would be helpful to them rather than using the television set as your primary support in that area. And just ability to get the person you're cared for out and about and doing things. So it's a team job for most people because we experience such burnout by carrying the whole burden individually. And I speak to a lot of spouses, so I know that, how hard it can be. So what I try to do is work very hard on boots on the ground in all of LA County to not only visit places that have memory care portions of their community. They can be part of assisted living, and we can talk about what that looks like, or they can be standalone memory care facilities where someone would reside, because ultimately home care has become so expensive that people are reverting to it, both for financial reasons and the other reasons I mentioned about having insightful programming that meets a person with dementia where they can cognitively feel like they are successful. And that takes a specialized program. In California, which is where I am, there are licensing requirements for additional training for anyone who works with a dementia population. In the LA area, pricing varies quite dramatically, as do programs. Sometimes the burden is on the activity director to establish appropriate memory care activities. Sometimes the places have put quite a bit of money into getting feedback, research-based feedback on what they're doing. Some places use a lot of technology to support activities in a community, but you really have to work with that technology appropriately, or you become so focused on your presentations and your crossword puzzles and brain games that you lose your clients. So it takes another level of skill. When I work with somebody, first of all, let me explain the way my industry works and the way I work. I do not charge for my services. My goal is to partner with the families I'm working with to figure out where the person is in the disease and what makes sense geographically, financially, and with how they are manifesting their disease. And so if they are far along in I mentioned assisted livings having memory care, but there are also small homes that deal with memory care. They're called board and cares most frequently, but they are in residential areas and their activities are toned down so that someone who is reactive to too much stimulation or needs a lot of hands-on care that the caregiver ratio in a bigger facility cannot ultimately provide. They are put in a small home, and again, I'm speaking about California, with maybe 6 residents and at least 2 caregivers in a smaller environment, a home-like environment, so that they can be very hands-on with dressing, bathing, toileting. Maybe the person is bedridden and maybe they're going towards hospice care. So I just wanted to stay in terms of understanding your memory care options. They can be anything from being at home, going to daycare programs, using supports to try to keep them at home. But if it becomes too much, either a large assisted living facility with a memory care designated portion, or a small board and care home, or a facility that's all about memory care, where everyone in the facility gets the training to interact with someone with dementia. That's the spectrum. We can talk about skilled nursing, but I don't perceive that to be a great environment for someone with dementia, since skilled nursings are generally set up as rehab places, and therefore the person is reaching out for help, and people with dementia don't necessarily do that, and that is a medical setting. So I'm going to focus on next how you determine the right setting for your loved one. And what I do when I speak to a family is, and again, no cost to the family. I started to say this and got sidetracked, but I spent a lot of time with my families over the phone, in person, whatever works, to figure out the right setting for them amongst those that exist. And that is going to be back to determining the goals of the family, the financial issues of the family, and particularly what kind of environment is going to support the dementia as it's manifesting itself. And I ask a lot of questions also about who the person is above and beyond the disease. I like to be a matchmaker. There are maybe cultural touchstones to make the person feel more comfortable in a new place, language issues, religious touchstones, whatever the person was comfortable with in their life, I want to bring up as much as possible to make them comfortable in their new setting. So I will ask the families a lot of details about who the person is above and beyond the disease and what's going to make them feel at home. Determining the right setting will also dictate when the time is right to move, because sometimes if people don't see a good option, they are reluctant to make a change. And I understand that, because change is tough for people with dementia. But we have to put the oxygen mask on the caregiver first and make sure that the caregiver is going to be okay. And with spouses, I have found that they can really weaken themselves by not having sleep at night and a whole raft of other things. And if you show them a setting that makes sense, the guilt in transitioning someone out of the home is lessened, and they can feel good about getting back to being a spouse and not doing all of the caregiving required. I help them evaluate different memory settings, and provide questions that they should ask when touring, but also try to make them a savvy consumer of the resources that are out there. I do negotiate, since my fees are basically just to refer the family to a property. I don't like what's happened in our industry. If you go online to find someone to give you properties to look at, you will more than likely get a call center model place that just throws out options or lists and doesn't give you specific help you may need making this transition, and actually trying to drive down the price for you. My fee is not attached to you. It goes in out of the marketing budget, and I work with everyone out there to also make sure that the fees are appropriate. And frankly, that the physician's report is appropriate. In California, before you move anyone to any of the options, there should be a state-required physician's report, listing diagnosis, listing medications, listing what's going on. And I like to review that to make sure nothing is askew. I do everything from discharge planning to long-term planning. So trying to consolidate everything I do in a talk about options is tough, but I'm gonna try. When someone is hospitalized, and that is the precipitating factor, of course, things get very stressful for the family. And also the paperwork required needs to be overseen. So there's a lot of things that someone like myself can do that I perceive as part of the job in placing someone correctly. I also help families figure out funding sources. And one of the questions I'm frequently asked is, Medicare, doesn't it cover any of these medical costs? The answer is it covers the same things it covers when the person is at home. It covers drugs if you have a supplemental Medicare plan, rehabilitation, home health, and hospice. And I could do a whole talk on each one of those. But if you place someone in a facility, they can get home health coming in or hospice care as appropriate. If it is prescribed by the doctor, that is Medicare covered. But to live in a memory care facility, that portion is not covered. Sources of funding, though, can be, if someone was a veteran, I try to direct them towards getting veterans benefits, which help, that money can be used towards placement. If someone has bought a long-term care policy, I usually review the long-term care policy to make sure that they will be approved for their long-term care benefit in another facility. And that's pretty much all that exists except for the Medi-Cal program, which is California's low-income welfare program called Medicaid in other states. I will briefly say that I put together a letter that I send out to social workers, discharge planners, people in the field on what your options are with Medi-Cal. The program in California is changing as we speak. And one of the resources is becoming impacted. So that is a whole other question that I can answer if people want me to talk about Medi-Cal. Most of the places that, well, the places that I refer to are private pay. Most places do not convert to Medi-Cal. That's a question I get a lot, which is the welfare system. Another thing that I want to talk about is easing the transition to one of your memory care options. I work with families to figure out scenarios that are going to make sense for someone with dementia, knowing that all change is tough on someone who is experiencing dementia, and that generally the caregiver holds the judgment piece for the person with dementia. It is very hard for them to assess themselves realistically. The first thing that they really lose is judgment, self-judgment capacity. After all, people with cognitive loss, it's humiliating. They often try to cover, devil's in the details in your situation, but we want to respect them and give them dignity in whatever environment they go to, and put them in a situation where they will be with the group that they belong in within the memory care transition through the disease. And some places are better equipped to do that than others. I want to stress that when I work with a family, it's about letting them feel that due to our discovery together, they have picked the best option for their loved ones that they can. And then they become ambassadors. And I work with them on what to say to the person, how to set up the room so that it looks like home if they're going to move them out of the home. Knowing that people with dementia, oftentimes what they don't know is scary. And so you don't want to talk too much about it. You want to show, and you want to assess and have the property assess to make sure everybody's on board with the care they will be getting. So I want to say it's a tough transition, and I remain there through the years, actually, with my families. I've placed them in bigger facilities first because they need the stimulation and care, but moved them to smaller communities as they are not benefiting as much from the activities and need more hands-on care. So I would maybe move them to a small home. Very hard to get everything from one location because this disease goes on for years. And I also want my families to be savvy consumers. I want them to know that pricing is negotiable, but you want to have the staff paid adequately so that there's no turnover or minimum turnover. There will be turnover, but minimum turnover in a place. I will have researched the places, been to the places, know their history and their management, because there is a lot going on in the world of senior residential care. A lot of consolidation, and we need to be a sophisticated consumer of it. So my goal is not just placement, but helping the person navigate through this. Also, if the person's in LA County, I certainly know the resources for daycare and other things that are outside what I get paid for, but am happy to help them with. I am very curious to know what is of interest to you. I understand there's like 60 some odd people on this call, and everybody has individual concerns. So I would love to get questions and also have Lisa's Care Connection give out my number, since I don't charge the family for my time. I would love them to pick my brain, and I'm going to take a throat lozenge and allow for questions.
Not sure, Bonnie, if you can see the question in the Q&A. So it's says, I'm in South Carolina. It's not uncommon here for a family caregiver to try to place their loved one with dementia in memory home care because they no longer care for them due to the challenging behaviors. But memory care communities will not accept a person because those same behaviors are deemed unsafe for other residents. What is a family to do in those situations?
Give me 1 minute. Okay. There are several things to do. First of all, sorry about my voice. Allergies. So I would say one of the first things I would suggest is talking to the doctor about medication. Nobody wants their loved one to be a zombie, but we also don't want our loved ones to be reactive, which means they're scared or in pain. There are many medications. Some of them have side effects, but Seroquel and sorry about this, and other mood stabilizers can be attempted so that the person can be placed. If a person has a lot of behaviors, they may need to go to places that accept behaviors. And there are those properties, but they tend to be very expensive. So, first of all, I would always go to a psychiatrist or a person who specializes in medications that deal with mood disorders and the reactivity of someone with dementia, to try to get the medications right. Because I say to the families, they are terrified or in pain. There's some reason for these behaviors. Paranoia. These things can be helped with medication. And there is some bandwidth with medication to properties. I have gotten people accepted in properties, but they were certain types of properties. So again, devil's in the details. I hope that helps. It's a terrible situation to be in.
Okay, and we have another question is how do we know that the facility is taking proper care of their loved ones?
Well, when I work with the family, first of all, I really want the family member to be nearby. I want the family to create a team with the staff where they are. So there is a fluid interaction back and forth. Every property is licensed. You can tell. I do a deep dive into licensing to see if there's been complaints about that facility due to care. And if they've been substantiated, that's the other issue. But the best way to work with the facility is to become part of their team, to give the caregivers all the clues about how to calm the person, be with the person, anything you know that helps the person, things they love to do or look at, and music, whatever it is. And don't be a stranger. If you can visit once a week, that's great. You will know. Try to get the phone number of the person in charge of care at your facility and build a relationship with them. So that is the best way to know about care. Of course, I can give you information about their history, but caregivers come and go. One of the things when you're touring is see about longevity of staff. If the staff has been there a while, chances are they're valued, paid well, and doing a good job. But the only way to know is to have eyes on and to let the facility know you're part of their team and you want to be informed, as you should be, in any change of condition or situation. Hope that helps.
Yes, and the next question is, when do you know when it's time to move your loved one into a memory care facility from your home?
Hopefully before your health suffers or your life diminishes and you become depressed and isolated. That's a very personal question. I never tell somebody when to move. I show them what their options are. Because many times I hear a spouse saying, you know what, his care is going to be better than I can do as one individual alone. That then is the right time to move. If you see that the care is better somewhere else, yes, there will be a transition period. I've seen very quick transitions and I've seen transitions that take longer. But, and some people, by the way, at home will say to their spouses, take me home. Kind of that's a gift in a way because it shows that is a euphemism for that person and is not place dependent. So I can't tell you when personally. I would never tell a spouse or anybody else when the right time is. If you see something that makes better sense for them and better sense for you as a caregiver, because again, what I see oftentimes is caregivers get completely worn out and then something happens to the caregiver and then the ship goes down. Don't wait until you feel your health or your well-being is being that compromised. Investigate options. And when you see something right, it will make it easier to make that decision.
Okay, we have another one that's, what are the specific questions to ask when choosing a facility?
Well, I will give you some, but again, the devil's in the details because it's got to be all about the needs of the person that you're placing. I would go back several times, at least, to any place you're considering at different times of day. So this is a hard question to answer generally because I don't know who you're taking care of. But in large or small, again, see if the staff looks happy. They are the caregivers. They're the most important factor in how this is going to go, because people with dementia in a good situation will have their favorite caregiver or latch on to somebody. or latch on to another resident, frankly, also. So that the caregivers look invested, that they know everybody's names, that they get away from the sales staff. I mean, when you go in, they're there to sell you. I mean, if we're talking about a big place. And go there during activities. You know, boy, there's so many things I want to say about this. I just say I tour with people. So I make sure that the sales kind of person will back up. And I don't want talking, I want showing. I want to see a memory care activity in process. So I see whether they are using a screen and following what's going on at the screen, but not engaging the people in the room, which is the most important factor. So how are they using their activities? There are some properties that I work with do a great job of training them and don't use those pre-canned programs that everybody raves about, but if you don't use it correctly, it's not good. So I'll tell you what, okay, ask about ownership. How long have they been around? Ask about who's running it. If it's a big facility, how long has the executive director been there? When I'm working with a family, it's important to know that the buck stops with the executive director at a big facility. See the mood of the residents. Also, come at lunchtime. See if people are talking to each other. How many people need to be fed? Are they in an area? How are they handling the differences of the range of people with dementia? If you are looking at a small boarding care, wow, have there been a lot of changes there in the industry? You want to make darn sure the place has a track record, been around. I want to stress, yeah, you want an outdoor space. If someone loves the outdoors, do you see them taking them outdoors? You'll get a vibe from the caregivers and the people. And you want to come several different types of day in a boarding care, but how long has they been around? And again, you know, come during meals and see what the food is. You know, the canned ones, like the smell and all of that, yes, that's important too. I feel like you'll know if a place smells bad, that means the care is bad. Are the caregivers more concerned about rushing around cleaning up than they are about the residents? Do they let the activities go on if the residents are engaged? I see a question from Brianna. Hi, Bri. So those are the questions that I'm thinking of right now. But I can send you a list of questions, but the devil's in the details. Think about who's being placed and what their needs are.
Okay, next question is, sorry, go ahead.
I started to read what Brianna was saying, and I'm not sure I got it. I think the difference between a nursing home, just reframe the question for me, will you?
Yeah, so difference between nursing home, assisted living facility, and boarding care.
First of all, a lot of people don't know that a boarding care and an assisted living have the identical license. It's just a question of scale. A big facility needs a separate cook and an activity director and a lot of things, but both of them have similar rules about medication management. So they're licensed identically, but they are a social model. They do non-medical care, meaning they'll do what the doctor orders them to do and nothing that the doctor doesn't order them to do. So they won't, let's say if someone is not feeling well and the doctor doesn't have a as needed aspirin or something on call, they're going to have to call the doctor and make sure they can give them medication. So a lot of people don't know that they are a non-medical facility from the standpoint of a doctor. Even if they have a nurse on staff, she's going to have doctor's approval for any medication, as opposed to a nursing home. And there are so many misconceptions about nursing homes, and I can understand why. Basically, in these days, nursing homes are Medicare covered as rehab settings for someone coming out of the hospital to rehabilitate. With dementia, occupational therapy and physical therapy can be very challenging because it's hard, depending upon the degree of the dementia, to have the person following the instructions and working hard. Let's say they've fallen and they need to build muscle or something. It's just hard. Once they have reached the point that they can get them to medically, from a fall, from a medical condition, where they wound up in the hospital. Nursing home is where you're discharged to as a rehab. It is a medical setting. Doctors and nurses are there 24/7. It is licensed very differently than an assisted living or board and care. And it's set up for a short-term stay. And frankly, it's not dementia friendly generally, because people with dementia don't tend to use call buttons and things like that. And they need help with eating oftentimes. And the staff is sometimes understaffed and they won't sit there and feed somebody. So it's tricky. But a nursing home is not usually a residential option. You can live there. Let's say you're a brittle diabetic and have a lot of shots and injections, or someone who weighs 300 pounds and can't be maneuvered easily, or there's have a feeding tube, some extenuating. You can have a catheter, by the way, and wound care and things like that in an assisted living. But there are very few medical conditions that you have to live in a skilled nursing facility. Also, they're very expensive because you're paying for doctors and nurses on staff. Dementia is not one of those diseases that nursing homes are generally a residential option. I hope that makes sense. If there are further questions about that, be happy to parse it down.
Yeah, thank you. And then I have one question. I've heard that the facility sometimes asks that you not visit for a week or so that the patient can acclimate before the family visits. Is this realistic?
I don't know who, I'm not, honestly, if it doesn't sound realistic to you with your dementia person, then you are not on the same page as the community they're being placed in. Sometimes, yes, you have to back off so they will reach out to staff. Sometimes families have gotten in the way of that process by just preventing them from connecting with other people. But there is no hard and fast on that. I'm not. The community is asking you for their trust. They feel it's required, I guess, in your situation. I would have to sit down, have the care director explain to you why, so that you understand it. Because one size does not fit all with transitions. And I don't know enough to weigh in on it, but I'm going to say to you, the person, the resistance they're up against with the transition, and talk to them. It should make sense to you, or how can you abide by it? It's kind of, I don't know the details to weigh in.
There is one question. I don't know if you'll know the answer because it is coming from North Carolina. So it says, my wife is a residential facility in North Carolina where there is an investigation for a concern. Am I entitled to know the nature of the concern to know if I need to move my wife?
So again, I'm in California, but in California, absolutely, if there was something, I mean, you've heard about it, and if it were here, I would definitely get the details of it. I mean, they do an investigation. They may not have the details yet, but absolutely, in California, you would have the right. I don't know about North Carolina. It doesn't make sense to me that you would not have the right. Let them do their investigation and figure out what was going on so that you have all the information, because yeah, of course you need that. I don't know the rules in North Carolina.
Yeah. And there is one question. So I would like to discuss if there are any options for types of living with your loved one and the memory care being available.
Yes, is the answer. Absolutely yes. Because I mean, the answer is definitely yes. There are a variety of them. You're not alone in being a spouse or loved one that doesn't want to be far from them. So yes, that, you can either be with them in memory care and come and go during the day, or have, depending upon and again, it's depending upon the property and depending upon where the person is in the disease, how they will work it out. But yes.
Let's see, we got two more questions. When a facility is considering accepting a dementia patient, will it require a medical summary analysis from the patient's doctor?
Yes, there is. And again, I'm hoping this person's in California. When I begin to work with somebody, I send them a generic form right up front of what needs to be completed by the doctor. You want them to have a complete picture of what they're going to be up against, the medications, everything. So to do a fair assessment, if it is to your advantage to have them have that medical form before they do the assessment. Some people will do it without it. I just believe that we want to be very straight with everybody, and that's part of the assessment. They could be missing something. They could have a wound somewhere. Yes, you need, it's called a 602 or physician's report. And if you email me or call me, I can send it to you. It's generic. It can be used anywhere. That's how I begin working with a client, because they need to know what's going to be required to move them to an assisted living or board and care.
I think that is our last of our questions. There was a follow-up to the North Carolina. He's just mentioning that they are very hush-hush about the nature of the concern. Do you recommend him reaching out to anybody to find out?
In North Carolina,
Mhm.
licensing. I mean, is this the North Carolina one?
Yes. Mhm.
So again, I'm sorry, I don't know the rules in North Carolina. There is a licensing agency. Find out who the licensing agency is. Or go to well, I'm assuming he or she has done this, but or South Carolina, I see. Okay, so I'm seeing two questions. The executive director is the one that will be working with any licensing agency to determine what happened. I would go to the executive director to see where they are in the investigation and find out who the licensing agency is so you can go directly to them. That's what I would do. Someone asked me how you find a person like me in another state. So I'm kind of a renegade in that I am not the norm necessarily. You know, I have a social work background and a social work bent and sort of a consumer advocacy bent. But what I would do minimally is if you're in an area that's a city or there are chains everywhere. You want to go to the sales department and say, can you recommend a person who is boots on the ground, comes with their clients, visits facilities, and is well respected in the area? Call up a few of the chains or places that you know of in the area and see if the same name pops up. Because anybody worth their salt is known and has a reputation, and yeah, they want move-ins, the properties, but they also, I have found it has been an amazing experience when you really care about your clients' needs and they can tell. It's so I would do that. I would ask the sales department if they know someone who shows up and that they form a team with to learn about the details of their clients, because too many referral agents don't spend enough time up front learning about their clients, because sadly, the only way people get paid in my industry is for referring your name and contact information to them. I think that is, you know, great for getting paid, but not great for the customer, you. So you do not want somebody who's just going to splash your information all over the place. I do not give out phone numbers when I work with clients. You do not want to be marketed to. You want to actually team with somebody, in my humble opinion. So go check some of these places that you know of and ask them who they respect in the field, and see whose name comes up.
Okay. What kind of legal mechanisms do you need to place a loved one?
Legal mechanisms, there's no, okay. You cannot place first of all, I'm assuming you're working with somebody with dementia. They do not have capacity to sign a contract to move to a place. The power of attorney, good question, by the way. People with dementia should have a power of attorney. I hope it's already been in place. That usually it's the spouse, and a spouse generally doesn't need a power of attorney, but it's a document. Let's say you're a family member that you have been designated as making financial and medical decisions for this person. Again, I'm talking about California. I can send out forms that you can have a cogent, you know, person sign, but not someone already with, you know, dealing with dementia. Or you could file for conservatorship, but the easiest thing to work with is a power of attorney form that designates you as the person who steps up to the plate when the person you're caring for can't, and if they're suffering with dementia, they can't. They can't sign for themselves, they can't be responsible to pay the bills, and they can't read the contracts that you get from these properties. And by the way, a generic contract in California, you can give 30 days notice and leave the property. So I want to tell you that it's not like signing a lease to an apartment. You are joining an assisted living, and most places accept 30 days notice if it's not working out. And they give you this was a good question, because they give you a fairly standard, frankly, contract, including that 30-day notice. And there are other California state laws I could do a whole talk on, but they're going to need somebody to sign the contract that understands the contract. So good question. It's a power of attorney form generally.
Awesome. And we do have one question. What is the difference between memory care and assisted living facilities? So maybe if you can go in depth a little bit.
Great question. Thank you. So memory care communities, first of all of the caregivers understand and are trained, and hopefully in an ongoing, more than the minimum requirement, to deal with people with dementia. The patients required, the redirection required, the interpretation of behaviors required. They have specific activity programs. In assisted living, the activity programs are geared towards the bulk of the population who do not have dementia. People can live, depending upon where they are in the disease, in that environment, as long as they're able to participate. If they're not, then they're in the wrong place, unless they're beyond the point of taking advantage of activities, period. In a memory care, they're going to target the activities towards people with memory care. They're going to go slower. They're going to do craft. They're going to use the 5 senses. They're going to do craft projects. They're going to do music programs. They're going to do things that people with dementia can do. They also have what's called delayed egress. I have heard, and I don't know if it's accurate, but I've heard 60% of people with Alzheimer's type dementia become wanderists. They can wake up in the middle of the night and be disoriented. You want a place that has an awake staff 24/7 on call, watching, and helping with incontinence and all of that. And will redirect the person back to bed and deal with fall risks in memory care that are more frequent because ambulation becomes a problem with dementia. It's more specific to the disease. In big facilities, caregiver ratio is about, 1 to 7. So they bring everybody to certain activities so they can have eyes on them. The time to move to a board and care is when the person is less active and needs more one-to-one care. But again, to work with people with dementia, you need dementia training. And they provide help with the menu and eating and feeding. So dementia care has all these additional services, and frankly, are priced differently. Some places have all-inclusive care, so the person doesn't feel constantly that the price is changing as the care increases. Board and cares have an all-inclusive care structure. And yeah, different training, different activities, and different environment. Delayed egress means they can't wander out of the building. So those are some of the differences.
Okay. And we do have 5 more minutes. We did get one last question. I don't know if you might know. It says, in Illinois, the family is permitted to put a camera in the room to check on the family member. In California, I understand that the cameras are not permitted in care facilities. Is this true, or is it dependent on the waiver of the state by employees or owners of the facility?
So you have to get permission by the facility and the caregivers. They don't generally like cameras in the room because but they do have cameras in other places. And they do have fall detection systems, so it's up to the facility. And frankly, they'd have to get some waivers, to allow it. But generally in California, no, they don't like cameras in the room. Great question.
All right, so I think we have no more questions. So
Woo!
good job.
I ran out of my voice. What
Right.
can I say?
You
But
put your all into
please
it.
tell anybody, I am happy because everything's the devil's in the detail. They can call me. I do not charge. Pick my brain. That's what it's there for. But I don't know out of state rules.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Bonnie. If there's any last things, I can share it in an email to all the attendees, your information. That way, if they want to reach out, if that's okay with you, or they can reach out to us for your information as well. And thank you so much for this. This was very enlightening.
Thank you, Sochi. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you. Appreciate you as well. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.